Hello, dear listeners, and welcome to The Curious Case. The air tonight feels still, doesn't it? Almost too still. Do you ever notice how silence can sound louder when something's about to happen? Tell me in the comments, are you listening with your tea or your thoughts tonight? Settle in. Subscribe if you haven't yet, because tonight, something quiet will turn dangerous. The train slowed. Steam drifted past the window. Miss Marple gathered her gloves, her bag, and her patience. The journey from London had been quiet, save for one man snoring behind a newspaper. At Waverley Edge Station, a familiar voice called out, "Jane, over here!" Mrs. Agatha Price waved, cheeks flushed, scarf fluttering like a small flag of enthusiasm. Miss Marple smiled. "Agatha, how very kind of you to meet me." They embraced quickly. Mrs. Price talked as they walked. "You've chosen the coldest week of the year. The pipes froze at the church yesterday. The vicar says it's a sign. A sign of poor insulation, perhaps," Miss Marple said mildly. Mrs. Price laughed, a little too loudly. Her laughter carried strain, not cheer. She led Miss Marple toward her small motor car. "Everything's prepared for tomorrow. The bazaar, the stalls, the raffle. Oh, you'll love it." Her tone quickened. "Though I must admit, it's been trying." Miss Marple settled into the seat. "Trying?" Mrs. Price gripped the wheel. "Nothing serious. Just disagreements. You know how committees are." Miss Marple nodded. She did indeed. They drove through the village, in short, tidy silence. Smoke rose from chimneys. Children pulled sleds. Ordinary life continued, yet Mrs. Price's fingers tapped the steering wheel, a small, nervous rhythm. "Lady Wickham has donated something special for the raffle," Mrs. Price said at last. "A diamond necklace. Quite the sensation. Everyone's talking about it." "How generous of her," Miss Marple said evenly. "Yes, generous, and perhaps unwise. Some people feel rather strongly about valuables in church halls." Miss Marple said nothing. Mrs. Price talked faster. "Lydia Trench, our treasurer, insisted we fit a lock to the case." "Proper security," she said. "Quite right, of course. But she's been, how shall I say it, overzealous." Miss Marple waited. She knew silence opened doors. Words could not. Mrs. Price filled the quiet. "She keeps records of every shilling, every tin of jam, even who baked which cake. It's admirable, really, but the others find her difficult." Miss Marple looked out the window. "And what do you find her, Agatha?" Mrs. Price hesitated. "Efficient, and perhaps a little frightening." The car turned down a narrow lane. Cottages passed in rows of neat order. "The vicar's wife has invited us for sherry this evening," Mrs. Price said, changing tone. "She's eager to meet you. She reads detective stories, you—" "No." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Then she may be disappointed to meet a mere observer of human nature." They stopped outside a tidy house. Mrs. Price exhaled as though relieved to arrive. Inside, she fussed over tea things, dropped a spoon, laughed too quickly. Her hands trembled once, just enough for Miss Marple to notice. Miss Marple said gently, "You seem tired, dear." "Oh, it's nothing," Mrs. Price replied. "Just excitement. Tomorrow will be perfect." She smiled again. Too wide, too bright. Miss Marple stirred her tea, eyes lowered. She had seen that same expression before many times, the look of someone pretending all was well, when all was not. But beneath her friend's cheer, something trembled. The vicarage drawing-room smelled faintly of tea and furniture polish. Mrs. Clement moved like a bird, quick, bright, and endlessly talkative. Her husband, tall and distracted, nodded at intervals. "Miss Marple," Mrs. Clement said warmly. "Such a pleasure. I've heard all about your cleverness." Miss Marple smiled. "Then I must try to live up to it." Mrs. Price laughed politely. "Jane never boasts, but she always notices what others miss." The vicar coughed. "An admirable gift, especially useful at church meetings." Laughter followed, mild and proper. Miss Marple accepted her cup of sherry, listening more than speaking. The talk drifted easily, weather, donations, the bazaar, and the bishop's endless letters. Then a new voice joined in. Low, smooth, practiced. How philosophical of you all. Heads turned. Mrs. Lydia Trench stood at the doorway. She wore a dark blue dress. Her gloves, red leather, were being removed finger by finger. The colour caught Miss Marple's eye. Mrs. Price rose too quickly. "Lydia, how nice of you to come." "Of course I never miss church business. Or gossip," Lydia said lightly. Her smile was polite. Her eyes were not. She took a seat by the fire. The room shifted slightly as if everyone adjusted to her presence. Mrs. Clement hurried to fill the pause. "We were just discussing tomorrow's raffle." "Yes," Lydia said. "I trust the necklace will remain under proper supervision. I keep the key myself." Her tone was calm, controlled. Mrs. Price smiled, but her cup rattled in its saucer. "Security is always safest in capable hands," the vicar said, trying for peace. Lydia's lips curved. "Exactly. One must be precise, especially where temptation exists." The word lingered longer than it should have. Miss Marple looked over her cup. "Temptation exists in most committees, Mrs. Trench, usually in the form of jam tarts." The room laughed. Even Lydia smiled, though it did not reach her eyes. "Mrs." Clement clapped her hands gently. "Well said, Miss Marple. That's the spirit we need tomorrow. Joy, generosity, and no quarrels over biscuits." "Or funds," Lydia added. Another small silence. The vicar cleared his throat. "Yes, quite. Now, who will be selling tickets?" Mrs. Clement listed names. Mrs. Patterson, Miss Wickham, and young Helen Cottrell. "A sweet girl," she said. "Shy, but efficient. Lydia's taken her under her wing." Lydia nodded. "Someone has to guide the inexperienced." Mrs. Price shifted in her chair. "Helen's done nothing wrong." Lydia smiled faintly. "Of course not. She's simply eager to please." The tension hung, soft but present. Mrs. Clement began talking about tea prices. The conversation drifted again, safer ground, lighter tone. The red gloves now lay on the arm of the chair. Miss Marple glanced at them once more. Red leather. Immaculate. Not the sort of thing one forgets. She set down her empty cup. Outside, the clock struck 8. Inside, voices carried warmth. Laughter rose again, polite and quick. But in the spaces between each word, something colder waited. Behind the laughter, a silence waited. The morning moved with purpose. Villagers hurried between tables, arms full of boxes, ribbons, and complaints. The church hall buzzed with cheerful order. Miss Marple arrived with Mrs. Price at 10. Both carried lists. Mrs. Clement was already giving instructions. "Keep the cake stall near the window. Better light for the icing." "Mind the draft," Mrs. Price said quickly. Yes. We'll manage." The talk was light, but the glances were sharp. Each woman wanted her corner to look most inviting. Homemade jams glowed like amber. Scarves folded in stacks. One corner had been cleared for something special. The glass case stood there, empty for now. By noon it would hold Lady Wickham's necklace. Mrs. Price sighed. "I wish she hadn't offered it." Miss Marple looked up. Too much excitement? Too much temptation? Lydia Trench entered just then, red gloves once again. She carried a small velvet box and the air of command. "Please be careful," she said. "This necklace is valued at several £100." Mrs. Clement gasped softly. "How exquisite." Lydia smiled without warmth. "And how fragile." "The lock is fitted, of course. I keep the key." Her hand rested on her blouse where a small chain disappeared. Miss Marple said nothing. She observed the way Lydia positioned the case. Central. Visible. Guarded. Too perfect. Helen Cattrall appeared next. A young woman with fair hair and anxious eyes. She carried raffle tickets and a ledger book. "Mrs. Trench asked me to help here," she said quietly. Lydia nodded. "Yes. Helen will record the ticket numbers." Accuracy above all. Her tone made the girl blush. Mrs. Price tried to keep the peace. "Now, everyone, let's not make a fuss. It's meant to be enjoyable." Mrs. Patterson laughed. Nothing's enjoyable once money enters it. That's not fair, said Miss Wickham from the jam table. Oh, it's fair enough, Patterson replied. You'll see. Miss Marple looked around the hall. Everywhere she saw busy hands, smiling faces, and tiny storms behind the smiles. Committees always hid storms. She took a note of details: the case, the position of the door, the fuse box by the passage. Her habit of observation never rested. At lunch, Mrs. Price finally sat down. Her hands shook slightly as she poured tea. You'll be here tomorrow, won't you, Jane? Of course, Miss Marple said. It sounds interesting. Mrs. Price gave a weary smile. Interesting is one word for it. Outside, bells from Street Mildred's rang noon. Inside, the necklace waited in its glass prison, glittering quietly. People bustled, joked, and prepared. Everything was ready. Miss Marple closed her notebook. The day had ended with warmth, but she could feel the chill beneath it. Something restless moved under the chatter and tea. Tomorrow would shine bright, and then break. The afternoon began smoothly. Miss Marple stood behind the cake table, knife poised, smile ready. Villagers filled the hall, cheeks pink, voices pleasant. Coins clinked, cups rattled. Everything looked harmless. Mrs. Clement hurried by, breathless. 2 more tickets for the raffle, please. Helen Cattrall nodded, counting carefully. Her hands shook slightly. Miss Marple noticed. The girl avoided Lydia Trench's eyes. At the far end, the display case gleamed. The necklace caught every light in the room. It sparkled like something alive. People admired, whispered, and moved on. Lydia checked her watch. Twice. Mrs. Price fussed with a stack of scones. Mrs. Patterson complained about the draft. Miss Wickham carried jam jars across the floor. The vicar smiled from the donation table, looking proud and tired. Then the clock struck 3. Lydia walked to the small platform. She tapped the microphone that didn't work. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, the time has come for the raffle draw. Voices hushed. A few laughs faded. All eyes turned toward the velvet-draped case. Miss Marple folded her hands. Helen brought the drum of ticket stubs. The girl's face was pale. Lydia reached in, turned the handle. The room held its breath. Then darkness, a sound like a fuse snapping. The lights blinked once and died. Someone gasped. A chair scraped. Cups fell. A quick cry, half laugh, half fear. Stay calm, the vicar called. Just the fuse. His voice trembled, steady by effort. People murmured softly, keeping order as English crowds do. But in the dark, other sounds moved swift, deliberate. A footstep. Fabric brushing fabric. A soft click, metal on glass. Then silence. The hall felt smaller. Miss Marple stood perfectly still. Her fingers rested on the table's edge. She could hear breathing close by. Someone exhaled quickly. Someone else moved toward the door. The faint creak of hinges followed. Then nothing. Seconds passed, or minutes. Time in darkness loses shape. A dull thud came from the far end. Then light. The bulbs flared back to life. Faces blinked in confusion. Voices rose, relief and curiosity mixed. But the calm broke again almost instantly. Mrs. Trench stood at the platform, both hands pressed on the red velvet cloth. Her face was white, her posture rigid. The display case stood open, empty. Gasps scattered across the hall. Mrs. Price clutched the table for balance. Helen Cattrall stepped back, her lips moving but no sound came. The vicar hurried forward. Please, no one leave the room. Lydia's voice cut through the noise. The necklace, she said slowly. Someone's taken it. Everyone turned at once. Miss Marple saw fear. She also saw calculation. Different kinds of guilt looked out from different eyes. No one spoke again for several seconds. The silence was heavy, final. When the lights returned, it was already too late. Constable Watkins arrived 20 minutes later. Young, eager, out of breath. He looked around the hall as though facing a storm. "All right now," he said. "Nobody leaves. Nobody touches anything." The villagers nodded, obedient but restless. The air hummed with whispers. Mrs. Price clutched her handkerchief. Mrs. Clement murmured prayers under her breath. Lydia Trench stood stiff, her chin high, her hands folded too neatly. Watkins pulled out a small notebook. Who was nearest the case when the lights failed? Half the room answered at once. Voices overlapped, claims tangled, excuses blurred. I was at the cake stall. I was near the window. I was nowhere near it. I saw someone move. Watkins raised his hand. One at a time. The crowd fell half silent. Helen Cottrell's voice broke through the noise. "I saw a hand," she said softly, "just before it went dark." Watkins frowned. "A hand?" "Yes, a hand reaching for the table, wearing red gloves." Every eye turned. Mrs. Trench froze. Mrs. Patterson lifted her chin. Miss Wickham looked down at her own red gloves as though seeing them for the first time. 3 women. 1 color. Too convenient. "Red gloves, you say?" Watkins asked. Helen nodded. "I'm sure of it." Mrs. Trench's voice was calm. "You must be mistaken. Everyone here was moving." "I wasn't," Helen whispered. The room fell quiet again. Watkins jotted notes. "Anyone leave during the blackout?" "Mrs. Clement said, I heard a door creak." "Which door?" "The one to the church passage, I think." The constable turned. "Who was near it?" No one answered. Everyone looked at someone else. Mrs. Price tried to help. "We were all where we always are, constable." No one vanished. Miss Marple said nothing. She was looking at the floor. A faint scuff mark trailed from the table toward the passage. No one else saw it. Watkins walked to the display case. The lock hung open. Not forced, just turned. "Who had the key?" he asked. Mrs. Trench lifted her chin. "I did. It's here." She drew a small chain from beneath her blouse. The key dangled, untouched, perfectly placed. Watkins frowned. "So, it wasn't stolen from you?" "No, it hasn't left my neck." He made another note. Then he checked the lock again. It was simple, ordinary. "The kind you could open with time," Mrs. Patterson muttered. "Or a copy." Mrs. Trench turned. "Accusations won't help." Her voice trembled just enough for Miss Marple to hear. The constable tried to restore order. "All right, the necklace couldn't have gone far. We'll search every corner. Check the donation boxes. Every tin, every bag." The villagers obeyed. Drawers opened. Coins clinked. Nothing appeared. Miss Marple stood apart, calm and still. She saw what others didn't. A thread caught on the display hinge. Wool. Pale blue. Not from any of the gloves, she had noticed. Watkins closed his notebook. "We'll continue in the morning," he said. "For now, go home. Keep your doors locked." People began to leave, whispering theories. Miss Marple stayed behind for one last look. A lock turned without struggle. A missing necklace. A hand in red gloves. And now, a scrap of blue wool. Small things, she knew, open large doors. The house was quiet. Miss Marple sat by the small lamp with her knitting untouched. The teacup beside her had gone cold. She wasn't reading or writing. She was remembering. The hall. The lights. The scream that wasn't quite a scream. The shuffle of feet. The faint sound of a door hinge. Each moment played again, neatly arranged, like stitches in a row. She leaned back. The newspaper from that morning lay folded on the side table. A headline about shortages, another about rising prices. People were anxious these days. Anxiety, she thought, often made decent people foolish. But foolishness and theft were not the same. She tried to picture the scene as it had unfolded. Lydia Trench near the platform. Helen Cottrell beside the raffle drum. Mrs. Price halfway to the door. The red gloves. And that piece of blue wool. Blue. She had seen it before. Whose cardigan had been that shade? Ah, yes, Helen's. The quiet girl with the nervous hands. But Helen wouldn't dare. No. Not for herself. For someone else, perhaps. for someone she trusted or feared. Miss Marple reached for her notebook and wrote a single word: intent. She underlined it once. Theft was simple. Desire, opportunity, greed. Intent was another matter entirely. Someone had wanted more than money. She remembered Lydia's control. The way she held the key, always visible, as if daring anyone to look, too deliberate. And the phrase she used before the drawer: temptation exists where valuables lie. That had not been warning. That had been preparation. Miss Marple tapped the pen against the baiting page. If Lydia had planned the theft, she would never have risked her reputation. Not openly. Not unless she had another purpose. Perhaps the theft was a screen for something else. Something that required confusion. She wrote another word: distraction. She thought of the scuff mark leading to the passage. A straight path. Not hurried. Not panicked. Someone had walked, not run. Someone who knew exactly what would happen when the lights went out. And yet, the case had been opened cleanly. No force, no damage. If the key never left Lydia's neck, the lock must have been copied by someone with access. Helen again. The timid assistant. Too quiet, too eager to please. But who had told her to do it? Miss Marple rose and poured another cup of tea. Steam rose faintly. The house ticked. She felt the shape of the puzzle forming, slow and clear. 3 details stood apart: the gloves, the wool, the hinge sound. Together, they made something more deliberate than a simple theft. She set her cup down. It made a small sound on the saucer, sharp in the silence. Tomorrow she would visit the hall again. She wanted to see how people behaved when the noise of panic had faded. Theft was one thing, but panic, she knew, was often planned. She was no longer thinking of theft, but of intent. Morning came cold and grey. Miss Marple walked to the church hall with her small umbrella, though it wasn't raining. Old habits comforted her. The door to the hall was unlocked. Someone was already inside. She heard voices, low, sharp. 2 women. She stopped just outside the kitchen door, unseen. Mrs. Price's tone carried worry. Lydia Trench's voice carried control. "You can't keep blaming me," Mrs. Price said. "I told you I warned everyone." "And yet," Lydia replied, "the necklace vanished from a locked case. In your event." Miss Marple stood still. The sound of a spoon tapped against a cup. "Nervous energy, not guilt-fear." "I've done everything by the book," Mrs. Price said. "You wanted the display, you wanted the publicity. And you wanted my approval," Lydia replied softly. "Don't pretend otherwise." A pause, long enough for the clock to tick 3 times. "Approval?" Mrs. Price repeated. "You mean fear?" Lydia laughed quietly. "They're not so different." Miss Marple heard a chair scrape. The sound of someone standing, then pacing. Lydia again. "Do you know how quickly people turn when money disappears? They'll need someone to blame." Mrs. Price spoke fast. "And you've already chosen her, haven't you? Better one frightened girl than a whole committee." "The frightened girl. Helen." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. "She had the ledger," Lydia continued. "She touched the case. She dropped her pen near the platform. The story writes itself." Mrs. Price whispered, "You'd ruin her." Lydia's reply came smooth, steady. "It's not ruin, it's practicality." A teacup rattled. Mrs. Price's voice trembled. "You think you can control this? You think the police won't see what you're doing?" "I think," Lydia said, "that I know how people think, and they'll believe the story that costs them the least." The words fell like a quiet knife. Miss Marple didn't move. She could almost picture the scene. Lydia standing tall, Mrs. Price shrinking beneath her. 2 women caught in the same snare, one holding the rope, the other tied to it. Mrs. Price tried again. "If you force this, Lydia, I'll speak." "You won't," Lydia said simply. "You never do." A door hinge creaked. Miss Marple stepped back just in time as Lydia passed through the corridor. Her perfume lingered faintly sharp, chemical, controlled. Mrs. Price stayed behind, breathing hard. Miss Marple waited until the sound of heels faded. Then she entered quietly. Mrs. Price sat at the small table, her face pale. When she saw Miss Marple, her mouth opened, then closed again. "My dear," Miss Marple said gently, "you look quite unwell." Mrs. Price pressed her hands together. "You shouldn't be here." "Perhaps not," said Miss Marple, "but then neither should anyone else this early." Mrs. Price looked toward the door, then back to her. "She's going to destroy that girl," she whispered, "and I can't stop her." Miss Marple said nothing. She poured the remaining tea, her mind already working. Lydia Trench was not protecting her reputation. She was protecting something deeper, something that frightened her enough to build a plan around it. It was not the necklace they feared losing. The bell above the shop door jingled softly. Miss Marple stepped inside, brushing her gloves together. Mrs. Dodds, the grocer's wife, looked up from behind the counter. "Morning, Miss Marple. You've come early." "I like to catch people before the day grows." "Noisy," Miss Marple said. "Quite right," Mrs. Dodds replied, lowering her voice. "You've heard, I suppose?" Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Only that the necklace has not yet reappeared." Mrs. Dodds leaned closer. "It's not the first time things have gone missing after a bazaar." "Oh?" "No, indeed. We had trouble once before. Long ago. Not with jewels, though." Miss Marple waited. The woman enjoyed her stories too much to need encouragement. 10 years back," Mrs. Dodds said, "we had a treasurer named Mr. Cottrell, Helen's father. Nice man. Too nice, some said. Always helping others. Always covering their debts. Until one day, he didn't." Miss Marple nodded slowly. "I remember the name." Mrs. Dodds continued. "There was money missing from the parish fund. No proof, of course, but plenty of whispers. He fell ill soon after. Heart, they said. Died before anyone could ask questions." "How very unfortunate," Miss Marple murmured. "Mrs.?" Dodds glanced around the empty shop. "Unfortunate, yes. Convenient, too. Especially for certain people." Miss Marple folded her hands. "You mean Mrs. Trench?" The grocer's wife blinked, startled. "I didn't say that." "No," Miss Marple said gently. "But your silence did." Mrs. Dodds hesitated. She was on the committee even then. She kept the records, same as now. Always so careful, so proper. But there was talk that Mr. Cottrell took the blame for an error that wasn't his. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. "And the records vanished after his death?" Mrs. Dodds nodded. "All burnt. By accident, they said. So nothing was ever proved." The shop door opened. A customer entered, nodding politely. Mrs. Dodds lowered her voice. "Helen doesn't know, you see. Or maybe she does, deep down. She's always looked half afraid of Lydia." Miss Marple adjusted her gloves. "Fear often runs in families, Mrs. Dodds. But so does conscience." The woman looked uneasy. "Do you think that necklace business has something to do with all that old trouble?" "I think," Miss Marple said, "that history has a habit of repeating itself when people refuse to tell the truth." Mrs. Dodds sighed. "Poor girl. She's nothing like her father, though. Too timid for her own good." "Timid," Miss Marple said softly, "is sometimes just another word for trapped." The other woman nodded, unsure what that meant. Miss Marple thanked her, paid for her tea and sugar, and left quietly. Outside, the church clock struck 11. The sound carried faintly through the crisp air, steady and sure. Miss Marple paused on the pavement, her mind already connecting threads. A dead treasurer, a vanished ledger, a careful woman who never lost control, convenient, dying just when questions began. Helen Cottrell stood near the church gate, clutching her coat collar. Her eyes were red. Her breath showed in small clouds. She looked up as Miss Marple approached. "Oh, Miss Marple, I didn't expect anyone." "I'm an early riser," Miss Marple said calmly. "It's easier to think when the world's still quiet." Helen gave a small, nervous laugh. "I can't think at all lately." They walked slowly toward the bench by the wall. Miss Marple waited, letting silence do its work. It always did. Helen spoke first. "They say the police will search again today. Constable Watkins came by my house last night. My mother nearly fainted. Did he ask you many questions? Only a few. Where I stood, what I saw, what I touched. Helen's voice wavered. And I answered everything. Except one. Miss Marple folded her hands. Which one was that? Helen looked down. He asked who I thought did it, and I couldn't say. Couldn't, Miss Marple said softly. Or wouldn't. Helen's fingers twisted the corner of her handkerchief. She's been good to me. She whispered. Who has? Mrs. Trench. The name came out like a confession. Miss Marple nodded slowly. Goodness can take many forms, my dear. Sometimes it looks rather like control. Helen swallowed. She took me on when no one else would. After Father died. She said I reminded her of herself when she was young. Miss Marple said nothing. Helen continued. She gave me work, money, even clothes for church. But she doesn't like mistakes. Miss Marple tilted her head. And when mistakes happen, Helen's lips trembled. She fixes them, quietly. How thoughtful of her. She says no one needs to know everything. A pause. The sound of a distant bell carried through the air. Helen looked up, eyes wide. I didn't mean to do wrong, I only did what she asked. What did she ask, child? Helen's voice dropped. To help her with the raffle books. To keep the key safe for a while. Miss Marple's tone stayed gentle. The key? To the case. Helen nodded once, quickly. Only for an hour. She said the clasp on her chain had broken. I believed her, but when the lights went out, she stopped. Her mouth tightened. Her hands shook. Miss Marple leaned slightly forward. You heard something? Helen nodded again. Footsteps. Close to me. And... She hesitated, breathing unevenly. And what? A voice. Just a whisper. Miss Marple waited. Helen's eyes darted toward the church door. She said I was foolish to look back. That people who look back never sleep well. Miss Marple's tone stayed steady. She said that? Helen nodded. She told me to forget, to keep quiet. Quiet about what, dear? Helen looked down at her hands. Her fingers were cold, white at the knuckles. I can't tell you, she said finally. She warned me not to speak, not ever. It was near dusk when the news spread through the village. Mrs. Lydia Trench had been found. Not at home, not at the hall, but near the pond behind Street Mildred's. Miss Marple heard it from the milk boy. He said it quickly, as if afraid of the words. They think she slipped, ma'am. The path was wet. Miss Marple thanked him and went straight to the vicarage. The place was quiet. Constable Watkins stood by the gate, cap in hand. He looked pale. Terrible business, he murmured. She must have lost her footing. Where exactly? Miss Marple asked. By the edge, near the willow. The ground soft. She was alone. They walked down the path together. The evening air smelled of damp leaves and worry. Two villagers stood at a distance, whispering. The body lay on a stretcher, half covered. Only her hand showed. Red glove. Still on. Miss Marple paused. She was wearing these yesterday, was she not? Yes, Watkins said. Same pair. And the other? He frowned. Only found one. The doctor rose from his crouch. Neck? Broken, he said simply. No struggle marks. Most likely a fall. Miss Marple's eyes moved to the ground. The mud told a different story. No skid marks. No sign of panic. Just one clean impression. A heel print. Deep. Firm. Too controlled for an accident. Watkins followed her gaze. You think? I think, Miss Marple said quietly. She did not slip. Mrs. Clement arrived then, flustered and shaking. She was coming to see me, she said. She never arrived. I thought perhaps she'd stopped at the shop. Miss Marple touched her arm. Did she say why she wished to visit? Something about setting things right. I told her to wait until morning. Miss Marple nodded. Perhaps she didn't intend to wait. Watkins cleared his throat. We'll record it as accidental unless something turns up. Something already has, Miss Marple said softly. She pointed to the sleeve. Near the wrist, just below the glove. A faint mark. Circular, pale against the skin. Like a bruise, but too neat. Watkins leaned closer. What do you make of that? Pressure, she said. Something small and tight. A bracelet, perhaps. Or a cord. The constable made a note. The doctor shook his head. Could be anything, we'll know more tomorrow. But Miss Marple's face didn't change. She'd seen that kind of mark before. It spoke of restraint, not misstep. As they lifted the stretcher, a small object fell from the coat pocket. A folded note. Watkins picked it up, glanced, and handed it to her. Just a few words. Forgive me, too late now. Miss Marple read it twice, then folded it carefully. Watkins said, Suicide, then. No, she said quietly. Not suicide. He stared at her. Then what, ma'am? She looked toward the pond, its surface unbroken and still. Her voice stayed calm. An accident, they said. She didn't believe them. The drawing room of the vicarage was full again. Same people. Different air. The talk was polite, but every word sat heavier than before. Inspector Grayson had arrived from the county office, older than Watkins, slower in tone, sharper in thought. He removed his hat, nodded at Miss Marple, and began quietly. Let's go through it once more. Everyone stays until we're done. Lydia's chair sat empty. Her absence filled the room like furniture no one wanted. Mrs. Price spoke first. It was dark, Inspector. No one could see clearly. He nodded. And yet everyone remembers something. He turned to Helen. You saw a hand? Helen's voice was small. Yes, sir. Red glove. But others wore them too. Mrs. Patterson interrupted. I had mine in my bag. I wasn't even near the stage. Miss Wickham frowned. I was helping with the jam stall. Ask anyone. The inspector made a note. So 3 women with red gloves, all accounted for. Mrs. Clement sighed. It's a pity about Lydia. Such a tragedy. Grayson looked up. You call it tragedy, others might call it timing. Mrs. Price flinched. Surely you don't think... I think, he said evenly, that death never chooses convenient moments. The vicar poured tea. Cups clinked. Conversation slowed. The inspector asked again, who last spoke to Mrs. Trench? No one answered. Eyes moved around the table. Finally, Mrs. Price said, She came to see me in the morning. We discussed the loss. She seemed calm. Calm, the inspector repeated. And after that? She said she was meeting Mrs. Clement, Mrs. Price said quickly. Mrs. Clement blinked. No, she wasn't. Not that I knew. Grayson wrote another note. Interesting. Miss Marple stirred her tea, saying nothing. Contradiction number 1. He moved on. The lights who handled the fuse box? No one claimed it. Then Watkins, standing by the wall, spoke up. There's a new fuse fitted. I found. Fingerprints, but all smudged. The inspector nodded. Still, someone had to reach it. Mrs. Patterson said, I thought Helen went that way. Didn't you, dear? Helen shook her head fast. No, ma'am. I never left the raffle table. Mrs. Price looked away. Contradiction number 2. The inspector sighed. Everyone's memory seems to adjust conveniently. He leaned forward. And the key? How did it return to Mrs. Trench's neck? No one knew. Helen's hands tightened. The inspector noticed. Miss Cottrell? She whispered. She took it back herself. When? In the dark. You saw that? I think I did. He closed his notebook. You think, or you know? I don't know anymore, Helen said softly. Contradiction number 3. Miss Marple finally spoke. You see, Inspector, it's quite natural. People wish to tidy their stories as they tidy their tables. No one likes disorder, especially moral disorder. The inspector half smiled. And you, Miss Marple, what do you make of it all? She folded her napkin. I make of it, she said quietly. That order doesn't vanish by accident. It's moved. Carefully. Grayson frowned. Moved? She met his eyes. By design. The room went still again. Tea cooled. Voices dropped. Every alibi now looked too perfect. Coincidences multiply only when someone helps them. The morning after Lydia's death was heavy with silence. People spoke softly, as though afraid of echoing her name. Inspector Grayson returned to the hall, this time with purpose. He searched each corner himself. Miss Marple followed him quietly. She preferred to watch, not lead. The room was almost the same as before. The display case sat open, empty still. A faint film of dust had gathered around its edges. Grayson sighed. "We'll find nothing new here." Miss Marple said nothing. She bent slightly, eyes tracing the floor. Near the raffle table, something small caught the light. She knelt. A folded piece of paper, half tucked under the leg of a chair. It was damp around the edges, as though handled with nervous fingers. She held it up. The inspector raised an eyebrow. "Another note." "Perhaps," she said. "Perhaps something more." He opened it carefully. Faded ink. Shaky writing. A single line at the top. "For Helen." Below it, a few sentences. Short, uneven. Words written in haste or fear. "I thought I could stop it. I thought it was just money. But she knew too much. Forgive me. I could not let them ruin another life." The inspector exhaled slowly. He read it twice, then handed it back. "Whose handwriting?" he asked. Miss Marple didn't answer immediately. She already knew. Lydia's. Firm loops. Confident slant except for the tremor at the end. Fear, not guilt, had written that. The kind of fear that grows from knowing the wrong truth. Grayson leaned on the table. "So she confessed?" Miss Marple shook her head. "No," she explained. "Explained what exactly?" "That the necklace was not the real theft." The inspector frowned. "You think there's more?" "There always is," Miss Marple said softly. She studied the note again. No signature, just the final sentence. A confession without context. A warning disguised as regret. Grayson looked toward the window. "If this is her hand, it ends the matter." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Endings are rarely so tidy, Inspector. You see, the guilty seldom write about forgiveness. The frightened do." He folded the paper, placed it in an envelope. "I'll have it examined." "Do," Miss Marple said. "But it won't tell you what you truly need to know." "And that is?" Who she meant by them. The inspector frowned again. "You believe there's more than one culprit?" Miss Marple met his eyes. "Not believe. No. The handwriting tells it." "How?" She pressed too hard on every downward stroke. "It's the mark of someone desperate to end a lie. Not her own, but another's." The inspector stared at her. "You see ghosts in ink, Miss Marple." She smiled. "No, just people." The clock struck 10. Outside, the sound of voices grew as villagers gathered to gossip again. But Miss Marple stayed still, holding the note between her fingers. "Forgive me, I could not let them ruin another life." Miss Marple sat with Inspector Grayson in the vicar's study. A small fire burned low, but neither seemed to notice it. Between them lay the note. Beside it, 2 old ledger pages Mrs. Dodds had quietly provided that morning. Grayson tapped his pen. "You're certain this connects to that old parish matter?" "Quite certain," Miss Marple said. "Patterns don't vanish, Inspector. They evolve." He leaned forward. "Go on." She pointed to the faded column of figures. "Here, this entry from 10 years ago. Mr. Cottrell's handwriting. Neat, consistent, but this line," she drew her finger over the correction mark. "A different hand entirely. Lydia Trench's?" "Yes." She added numbers that didn't exist. Small at first, then larger. A habit, I imagine. A dangerous one. And Cottrell noticed. Grayson said slowly, "Of course. Honest men always notice dishonesty." He confronted her. She shifted the blame to him. And before he could speak publicly, he was gone. Grayson frowned. "You think she had a hand in that death?" "No," Miss Marple said calmly. "She didn't need to. Shame and scandal often finish what poison cannot." He nodded grimly. "So she built her reputation over the ashes of a ruined man." "Exactly. And to keep it safe, she drew in his daughter. Charity, she called it, but charity can also be a leash." Grayson looked toward the window. "And the necklace?" A perfect diversion, Miss Marple said softly. She staged. Its loss to shift suspicion toward Helen if possible. When it went missing, everyone turned on the girl. That was her plan. The inspector exhaled. But something went wrong. Yes, Mrs. Price learned the truth, or enough of it to frighten Lydia, and Lydia's control began to slip. Grayson frowned. Then the note? She wrote it the night she died, Miss Marple said. She finally saw how far the lies had gone. She wanted to stop it. But someone stopped her first. Grayson leaned back, silent for a long moment. You mean the same person who took the necklace? Yes. Then who? Miss Marple's eyes softened. The one who believed loyalty was payment enough for sin. He stared at her. Helen Cottrell. Miss Marple nodded once. She found the ledger. She learned what Lydia had done to her father. Lydia tried to make peace, but Helen saw only betrayal. The blackout gave her the chance to act. The inspector said nothing. Miss? Marple continued. She didn't mean to kill her, only to frighten her. But guilt, Inspector, is a heavier thing than fear. Lydia slipped, or perhaps gave up, and Helen panicked. Grayson rubbed his temples. And the necklace? Still missing, likely hidden close by. Its value now is less in money and more in meaning. It represents everything Lydia stole: trust, reputation, and time. He sighed. You make it sound inevitable. Not inevitable, Miss Marple said softly. Just, well, practiced. Every decade, someone rewrites the truth to balance old sins. She looked again at the ledgers. The ink faded, the numbers neat. False order covering moral chaos. And somewhere, the books had been rewritten. The church hall felt colder now. The banners had been taken down. The stalls cleared away. Only the empty glass case remained like a reminder of the noise that had once filled the room. Inspector Grayson unlocked the door. Last look, he said. Then we close it for good. Miss Marple nodded. She moved slowly, eyes tracing corners others ignored. Helen Cottrell had not returned since the questioning. She had sent word she was unwell. Miss Marple doubted illness. Guilt, she knew, often looked very much like fever. The inspector walked ahead. Nothing new here, just dust and disappointment. Patience, Inspector, Miss Marple said gently. Truth dislikes haste. She went toward the side table where the raffle books had once been kept, the drawer stuck slightly. Inside scraps of paper, a broken pencil and an envelope with a missing corner. It bore one word. Records. Grayson stepped closer. Left behind? Or hidden in plain sight? Miss Marple said. She unfolded the papers. Old receipts. Parish funds, years old. Each with 2 signatures, Cottrell's and Trench's. But near the bottom, an extra mark. A faint third initial. H.C. Grayson frowned. Helen Cottrell? Miss Marple? Nodded. She wasn't born when these were written. But someone added her initials recently, perhaps to complete the illusion that she was involved all along, to make her father's name look untidy. A final manipulation. He stared at her. Then who added them? Miss Marple pointed to the faded edges. The ink is fresh, but the pen scratches are shallow. The writer pressed too carefully. Someone nervous. Someone trying to make it perfect. Grayson muttered. Lydia, again. Yes, Miss Marple said. The lie had to remain tidy until the end. She looked at the glass case again. The lock still hung loose. She lifted the velvet cloth that had once held the necklace. Her fingers brushed something small, flat, metallic. She held it up. A second key, identical to Lydia's. Grayson exhaled. So there was a copy. Yes, and whoever had it didn't need to steal it after all. He took the key, weighing it. She made it herself? No, miss, Marple said softly. She would never dirty her own hands with a key file. Someone else did it. Someone grateful, obedient, frightened. They both looked toward the door. Helen's absence now felt deliberate. Miss Marple replaced the cloth and turned toward the passage. I believe we'll find her at the vicarage, Inspector. But not waiting. He frowned. You think she's running? She might try, Miss Marple said, but running never lasts long. Guilt walks faster than trains. They left the hall. The door clicked shut behind them. The echo lingered down the passage. Miss Marple paused on the threshold. Her eyes returned to the empty case once more. She whispered almost to herself, "She'll return for it. Guilt always circles back to its object." Grayson looked puzzled. "Return for what?" "The necklace," she said. "And her father's name." Then she added quietly, as if finishing a thought already certain in her mind, "She would come back. They always do." The drawing room held its breath. Chairs in a circle, faces tense, hands tight around teacups that no one drank. Inspector Grayson stood first. "Thank you for coming," he said. "We will be brief." Miss Marple sat to his left. Mrs. Price, the vicar, Mrs. Clement, Mrs. Patterson, Miss Wickham, each in place. Helen Cottrell last. She chose the corner seat. Her eyes stayed low. Grayson began. "A necklace vanished. A woman died. We will set the order." He nodded to Miss Marple. She spoke without hurry. "Point 1, she said. "The blackout was not an accident. The fuse was new, but handled. Someone planned darkness. No one moved. Point 2, the case was opened with a copy key. We recovered that copy under the velvet cloth." Mrs. Patterson gasped softly. Miss Wickham looked at her hands. "Point 3, Miss Marple continued. "The key on Mrs. Trench's chain never left her neck. She arranged the display, yet wished to be seen as vigilant. That is a known habit of the guilty displayed caution." Helen shifted. The chair creaked. Miss Marple did not look at her. "Point 4, the ledgers," Miss Marple said. "We found old receipts, 2 signatures. A third initial added later. HC. Not possible at the time. Helen was a child. The addition is fresh." Pressed carefully. "That is the hand of fear." Mrs. Price swallowed. Her voice came thin. "Lydia forged those marks. She wanted the past to point away from her." Grayson raised a hand. "We will keep order," Miss Marple went on. "Point 5. Lydia wrote a note. Not a confession, a plea. Forgive me. I could not let them ruin another life." She had decided to stop the lie. She meant to speak. The vicar closed his eyes for a moment. "Christian courage," he murmured. "Point 6, Miss Marple said. "We come to the pond. No skid, no scramble. A firm heel print. Then a neat bruise at the wrist. That is restraint, not misstep." Helen looked up. Her lips parted, then closed. Grayson's tone stayed even. "Miss Cattrall, we ask that you listen. You will be heard." Miss Marple's voice softened. "Point 7. Motive. Not money. Not envy. Debt of the heart. Your father's name was broken to save a reputation. Lydia fed you kindness mixed with power. That mixture binds. It does not heal." Mrs. Clement whispered, "Oh, child." Miss Marple turned a page in her notes. Point 8. The copy key. "A girl does not file steel without reason. She does it because someone she trusts asks for help. Later, fear decides how it is used." Helen's hands tightened. Her knuckles whitened. "I never," she began. Grayson raised a palm. "In time." Point 9, Miss Marple said. "The door in the dark. You move toward it. Not to flee. To place the necklace. To move it out of sight. Then to meet Lydia by the pond. You meant to force the truth. She meant to delay it. 1 moment. Turned the scale. Silence spread. It touched each face and stayed. Helen stood. "I went to talk," she said. Nothing more. Her voice shook. "She said my father did it. She said the village believed it. She smiled when she said it. I only wanted her to take it back." Mrs. Price cried out once, then covered her mouth. Helen's words quickened. She pulled away. I held her wrist. Only that. She stumbled. I tried to help. It was... Her breath broke. A moment. Miss Marple finished gently. A very long one. Grayson spoke at last. "The necklace." Helen closed her eyes. "In the vestry box," she said. "Under the hymnals. I was going to bring it back. After." No one moved. The clock ticked once. Then again. Miss Marple folded her notes. Her voice stayed calm. Lydia built a lie on a good man's name. You built a worse one to break it. That is how guilt travels, Miss Cottrell. From ledger to hand, from hand to water. Helen sank back into the chair. She did not cry. She looked very tired. Grayson nodded to Watkins at the door. No chains yet, no harsh words, only procedure. Miss Marple lifted her teacup and set it down untouched. No one spoke. Truth had already entered the room. Helen sat alone at the table. The others had gone silent. Even the clock seemed unwilling to move. Her hands rested flat, palms pale against the wood. Inspector Grayson waited. Miss Marple did not speak. She knew the next words had to come from Helen herself. "I didn't mean to," Helen said softly. Her voice trembled but did not break. She said my father was weak. She said he signed false numbers to protect himself. But it was her, always her. She laughed when she told me. Mrs. Price closed her eyes. Mrs. Clement pressed a hand to her mouth. Helen looked at Miss Marple. She told me I should be grateful, that she saved us, that everything I had came from her mercy. I wanted to believe her, but then I found the papers, my father's books, his handwriting, his real accounts. They matched nothing she'd shown me. Grayson's tone stayed steady. "You went to her that night?" Helen nodded. "I wanted her to admit it. Just once. She said she would never. She said people need their stories neat, that no one remembers the truth if it's inconvenient." Her eyes filled, but no tears fell. She smiled when I asked her to stop lying. She said I was too late, that the village would never listen to a Cottrell again. She paused. I pushed her hand away. She lost balance. I tried to hold her wrist, but she pulled back. Miss Marple's voice was quiet. "You meant to defend your father's name, not harm hers." Helen nodded quickly. "I swear it. I thought if she confessed, people would forgive. I didn't want her dead. I only wanted the truth." The inspector closed his notebook. "Intent does not erase consequence." "No," Helen said, "but consequence doesn't erase intent." Her words came faster now, desperate and clear. "I hid the necklace. I didn't care about it. I just wanted the lies to stop. When she fell, I ran. I thought maybe it was punishment. Maybe for keeping quiet all these years." Mrs. Price whispered, "She raised you, child." Helen looked down. "No. She owned me." The vicar murmured, "Mercy comes through truth." Helen gave a small, broken laugh. Then she found none. Miss Marple rose slightly, hands folded before her. "Your father wanted peace, not revenge. But guilt passed from one heart to another like an inheritance. That is the real theft here. Not jewels, not ledgers. Dignity." Helen's shoulders sagged. She nodded once. "Then it ends with me." Her voice steadied. "I'll tell them everything. The records, the copy key, the lies. It won't change her death, but it will free his name." Grayson signaled Watkins quietly. No harshness, just duty. Helen stood, without resistance. Her face calm, as if the weight she carried had finally settled. Miss Marple looked at her with a kind of sorrow. "People who lie to protect love," she said softly, "always wish to be understood." The morning broke quietly. A thin light over the roofs. Birdsong returned, hesitant but honest. Miss Marple sat by the vicar's window, a cup of tea before her. The paper beside it lay folded, the note, the confession, the names. All neatly ended now, as such things must. She stirred her tea once. The steam rose slow, like thought itself. The village would talk again, of course. They always did. She sighed softly. Pride ruins the clever. Love ruins the proud. But shame ruins everyone. She looked out toward the garden. Helen's words still echoed faintly. Not angry, not afraid, only tired. Miss Marple smiled sadly. Human hearts, she thought, are such untidy things. But sooner or later, truth straightens them. The tea had cooled. She lifted it anyway, whispering to herself, "Truth cools slower than tea." Davis's voice returned, calm and warm. "Well, dear listeners, what did you make of it all?" He paused, letting the question breathe. "Would you have trusted Lydia's kindness? Or seen through it sooner? A soft chuckle. And tell me which clue gave it away for you. The red glove, the missing key, or the forged initials. He let the fire crackle in the background, the sound of evening settling in. Do share your thoughts below. I always read them with my tea. A gentle smile in his tone. Until then, tomorrow, another kettle will boil.